Sanyasya, giving up. Aste, remains. Sukham, in happiness. Vashi, one who is controlled. Navadware, in the place where there are 9 gates. Pure, in the city. Dehi, the embodied soul. Na, never. Eva, certainly. Kuravan, doing anything. Na, not. Karayan, causing to be done. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates, the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done. Translation with repetition. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates, the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The embodied soul lives in the city of 9 gates. The activities of the body or the figurative city of body are conducted automatically by the particular modes of nature. The soul, although subjecting himself to the conditions of the body, can be beyond those conditions, if he so desires. Owing only to forgetfulness of his superior nature, he identifies with the material body and therefore suffers. By Krishna consciousness, he can revive his real position and thus come out of his embodiment. Therefore, when one takes to Krishna consciousness, one at once becomes completely aloof from bodily activities. In such a controlled life, in which his deliberations are changed, he lives happily within the city of 9 gates. The 9 gates are described as follows. Navadware pure dehi, hamso lelayate bhahihi, vashi sarvasya lokasya, sthavarasya charasya cha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is living within the body of a living entity, is the controller of all living entities. Is the controller of all living entities all over the universe. The body consists of 9 gates, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, 1 mouth, the anus, and the genital. The living entity in his conditioned stage identifies himself with the body. But when he identifies himself with the Lord within himself, he becomes just as free as the Lord, even while in the body. Shvetashvara Upanishad 3.18. Therefore, a Krishna conscious person is free from both the outer and inner activities of the material body. Thus ends the transcendental Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today's discussion is about how to live happily in this city of 9 gates. But before we go there, let's just try to do a small recap of what we did yesterday. So yesterday's discussion was about the platform of peace and fearlessness. Sorry, there's a mistake here. Yes. So how can one come to the platform of achieving peace and fearlessness? Because the living entities in the conditioned state are not having peace, rather they are troubled by disturbances. Moreover, they are also fearful of their future as what is going to happen. So in the yesterday's verse we saw Yuktaha karma phalam tyaktva shantim apnoti naishtikim. So yesterday we were saying this word naishtikim was referring to steadily and unadulterated peace. So why does a devotee, a individual, engaged in yukta karma phalam? So basically, as we see yuktaha, so wherever there is word yuktaha, in this context, it is being mentioned as one who is engaged in devotional service. So one who is engaged in devotional service, now he is able to attain peace. But whereas ayuktaha, one who is not engaged in devotional service, he is not finding that peace or neither that freedom from fear. Now, that was what was discussed yesterday. So just to explain it further, so person in Krishna consciousness, he does not expect any result of his work. So this is a very important quality. So a person karma phala tyaktva. So a person in devotional, engaged in devotional activities, who is engaged in Krishna consciousness, he thinks that I am not interested in the result. Result may be this side or that side. I am engaged in the service. I am doing the act as a devotional service. And therefore, whatever the result is in Krishna's hand. Therefore, I'm not too much worried about which way the result is going to, because he's not worried about enjoying the result. Whereas, on the other hand, a person in material consciousness, what does he do? Kama karena. So a person who is not in Krishna consciousness, he is enamored. He thinks that enjoyment means acquiring the fruit of the activity. So because of that conception, for him, the enjoyment means grabbing things, trying to enjoy for himself, and therefore he is very much attached to the results of his work. And kama karena, so out of lust. Phale sakto nibadhyate. Therefore, because he is so much attached to his result of the work, he becomes entangled, nibadhyate, in the material world. So this is the difference between Krishna conscious person and who is not Krishna conscious person. Now, here further in the current verse today, moving on from yesterday's verse, there is description about how one finds happiness. What in this body, which is being compared here as Navadware. So Navadware, Nava means 9, Dware means gates. So in the place where there are 9 gates, so this is being figuratively referred. The body is being referred to as a place where there are 9 gates. And furthermore, it is being said, Pure means in the city. So in that city, who is present? Dehi, the embodied soul. So just like if you look at the ancient, we'll see, as we see here, there are different cities where there are big forts are made. And each of these fort have some gates. So it is through these gates that people come in, people go out. There are a lot of activities that happen through these gates. So there are people who are residing inside the city. But it is very important to recognize that the person who is inside the city and the city are two different things. But quite often, people sometimes get confused that I am the city. How is that? We will see that further. And so Navadware Pure Dehi. So this word Dehi, as we saw, Dehino Aspin Yatha Dehe, Kaumaram Yauvanam Jarat. So Dehino. So again, there, the embodied soul. So, but this word Dehi is so important because Prabhupada says that this understanding these two words, Dehi and Deha, are very important for a spiritualist. Because the beginning of spiritual life happens and one can distinguish these two terms, Dehi and Deha. So we'll pay attention to that as what happens to a person who is having a Deha. So when the soul is having Deha, what happens to the individual? So usually a person who has got Deha is not very happy. And therefore this verse is talking about how that person can be actually happy. The Dehi, when he is present in these 9 gates, still he can be happy. And how is that possible? So here the verse is saying, Sarva karmani manasa sanyas yaste sukham vashi. So everyone is trying to find sukham or happiness, but how one can find happiness? Here it is being said that sanyas yaste sarva karmani. So he is giving up or renouncing mentally all actions. And the living entity is controlling his nature. So let us first try to pay attention to this word called when the living being controls his nature. So what does this word controls his nature mean? And how by controlling one's nature, one can find happiness. So let us try to look at this first aspect and then we'll try to look up the other aspects. So Srila Prabhupada states that just like we see there are police and so usually we think police are meant for controlling or prevent us from something. But Prabhupada says actually the police is not meant to control you, but rather Prabhupada says that when you accept to be controlled by police, that's when police controls you. This is something interesting to note. So Prabhupada says, police is not controlling you, but you give the opportunity to be controlled by the police. What it means is Prabhupada states that there are so many crossings, there will be so many policemen at different spots standing, especially when we are driving, or in different scenarios, in different places, police may be waiting or sitting in a car. Now, until unless that police person is not looking at a person who is violating the rule, he will not control that person. But when the person is violating that rule, that's when he gets under the control of the police. So Prabhupada says that the living entity, the common man, when he does a mistake, he comes under the control of the police. All otherwise, they're not meant to control you. So similarly, in the case of the living entity, the Dehi is not meant to be controlled by Prakriti. So Prakriti is the material nature. So as we were saying, Navadware Pure Dehi. So this Navadwara, Pure, the city with 9 gates, is our body. The Dehi is different from the body. But now the Dehi is under the influence of the laws of nature. It is being controlled by the laws of nature. Now, why is it being controlled? Because the living entity has given the opportunity to be controlled by the Prakriti. Now, if he changes that nature, so just like we see the nature of a criminal or one who does a wrong act or who was speedily driven, and he has given an opportunity for police to capture him. Similarly, the living entity has done a certain activity because of which now he is under the influence of material energy. So there is this beautiful verse in Bhagavad Gita which says, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by nature. So here, as we saw, as Balram Prabhu was also mentioning, that from this section of the this chapter is talking about different kinds of doers. So this verse, chapter 15, this verse 13 is also talking about different kinds of doer, and this is very much related to the verse from 3rd chapter, 27th verse, Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha. So actually, the spirit soul is different from the body. And so Prabhupada has given a wonderful purport for this verse. And Prabhupada says the difference between a Krishna conscious person and an ordinary person is, although they may be doing similar activities, there is a wide gulf of difference in their consciousness. So a person in a material consciousness is deeply thinking that I am the doer, I am the sole doer. I am the cause of my action and my success. Everything is driven by my personal endeavor only. And Prabhupada says he thinks in that way because he does not understand the mechanism of the body, as how the body is produced by material nature and how the material nature is under the control of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, because a materialistic person cannot see this distinction as the other doers, he thinks himself to be independent, filled with false ego. So that's why it is called ahankara vimudatma. He is bewildered by false ego. Kartaham iti manyate. Because he is thinking, because of the false ego, he is thinking, I am the doer, and he doesn't recognize the other doers, the Supreme Lord and the Prakriti. Now, and because a person thinks independent of the Supreme Lord, he kind of engages in activities, as we saw in the last verse, he kama karena, because he does not see anything else beyond himself, so he wants to independently enjoy the result. And this independently enjoying tendency, because of the false conception of the self, is binding that living entity again and again in the material world. Now, Prabhupada further says in this purport that the suffering, the living entity, the soul, although subjecting himself to the conditions of the body, can be beyond those conditions if he so desires. Owing only to forgetfulness of his superior nature, he identifies with the material body and therefore suffers. So, Prabhupada is explaining what is the cause for the soul suffering. The Dehi is suffering. So, what is the cause for that suffering? So, Prabhupada is saying that the nature of the soul is superior. It is qualitatively one with the Supreme Lord. And it is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, it is not meant to be undergoing suffering. But Prabhupada says that the living entity can go beyond this current condition in which it is subjected to three kinds of miseries if only it desires. If the living entity desires that I do not want to be in this suffering, then there is a hope, there is chance that the soul can go beyond the conditions of suffering. And Further, it is being said here that why does the living entity come under the grip of this condition in which it doesn't want to be? It is very beautifully mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita, which says, Krishna bhuli se jiva anadi bahirmukha atheva maya tare deha samsara dukkha. Krishna bhuli se jiva. So that living entity, when it forgets Krishna, anadi, from time immemorial, bahirmukha means attracted by the external feature of the Supreme Lord. And because of that, so immediately, as soon as the living entity forgets the Supreme Personality of Godhead, immediately it comes under the influence of the external energy of the Supreme Lord. And the living entity, being conditioned, thinks that this material body, this material world is absolute, is true, and forgets anything that exists beyond this. And because of this moving away from Supreme Lord, because of forgetting the Supreme Lord, now because the living entity is attracted to the external energy of the Lord, now the laws of the material energy starts acting on the living entity. Now this one important principle is very important for us to know in today's class, is that when our consciousness is away from Krishna, we are under the influence of the material energy. When our consciousness is Krishna consciousness, when we understand that we should serve Krishna, we are servant of Krishna, and when we are engaging in activities of Krishna consciousness, then we are freed from the influence of material energy. And Srila Prabhupada gives again and again example as how when we chant Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, when we chant and hear, when we perform this activity on a spiritual platform, then we are immediately in Krishna consciousness. Immediately we are in association with Krishna. Because we are immediately in association with Krishna, then all the material emotions, the influence vanishes. Therefore, anxiety goes away. Therefore, three kinds of miseries one may be feeling externally in the material sense, but because one is in contact with Krishna, one is in association with Krishna, the influence of the material energy will not be there on the individual. So, if we want to come out of the suffering of this material world, the only route is to recognize our true nature and to associate with the Supreme Lord. And Prabhupada says, by Krishna consciousness, he can revive his real position and thus come out of this embodiment. So as long as I'm misidentifying myself, just like if I think I am my car, any scratch to the car will make me hurt so badly. But imagine there are so many cars which get hit every day in accident, but I don't care for any of those cars because I don't identify with that car. So wherever there is identification of myself, then the pain is there, the suffering is there. If I do not identify itself with myself, then there is no pain. There are so many people who are dying, but no one is crying. But if someone very close to me, because I'm identifying a relationship, that brings suffering. Similarly, our biggest suffering is because of our identification with this body, our identification with this material world. That is putting us in the influence. As soon as we give that up, giving in Krishna consciousness is not the way of giving, but getting attracted to Krishna by performing Krishna conscious activities. Then immediately this wrong conception immediately vanquishes. Therefore, when one takes to Krishna consciousness, one raises above the bodily conception of life. One recognizes his constitutional position as servant of Krishna simply by chanting, taking prasadam, following four regulative principles. This is such a quick process by which one can come to the platform of self-realization, which otherwise is so difficult. So the controlling nature. As in this verse, the purport is being said, when the embodied living being controls his nature. So controls his nature means the living entity must recognize that I should not engage in activities which are not helpful for spiritual advancement. I should have that self-control to recognize and to do those activities which are beneficial for Krishna consciousness. And all other activities I should not do. So as soon as one controls his nature this way and mentally renounces all actions means I am the doer. Whatever the conception, the bodily conception of life that I want to do, some materially big task, this task, that task. So these are all driven by a certain conception of the body in the mind. There is the determination is for something gain for the body. But when the living entity recognizes that I am not this body and therefore I do not want to act for the body or on the bodily platform, that is mentally renounces all actions. So mentally he is determined that I do not want to do any activities based on this material body, for the material body. I want to act on a spiritual platform. So when a devotee becomes convinced that happiness is on spiritual platform, happiness is when I renounce activities on material platform and is acting on that platform, then he is experiencing happiness even in this body. Even within this body, Navadware Pure Dehi. So this is a very important principle. So if within this body, if one wants to still feel the real spiritual life, the way is to constantly engage in various kinds of devotional services. So moving on from there, so as we saw, this verse is talking about Navadware Pure Dehi. So as we saw, usually if a city is protected by different kinds of fort, and there would be gates in the ancient times by which they would enter. So I think still in Delhi and Jaipur and other cities, there are different gates. So they call some gate which is going towards one direction, one name, another direction, another name. Similarly, in this body, we have 9 different gates. And that means the 9 different holes. So the 2 eyes, the nostrils, 2 ears, the mouth, the genitals, and the anus. So it is. So when one is in the bodily conception of life, all the activities that are happening through this, he thinks, identifies oneself with those activities. And therefore, he's attached to the activities which give pleasure to this 9 gates. And therefore, the consciousness is, how do I perform activities which give pleasure to these inlets or outlets? And therefore, a person is thinking, you see, the whole material world, there are so many restaurants. Why? Because this one tongue, one mouth needs something inside. And there is something nice to hear. And therefore, there is a big industry of music. Someone wants to see a movie, and therefore, there's such a big movie industry. So everyone in the material world, the most commonly, the people are thinking that I am this body, and fulfilling the necessities of this holes is the pleasure. And therefore, they're all engaged in activities which are satisfying these gates. On the other hand, a devotee recognizes that I am different from all these things. I am not these gates. I am different. I'm aloof from it. Because I'm aloof from it, my activities are to be different. My activities are to be different. So in the conditioned state, the living entity is only thinking himself to fulfill these necessities, and therefore he gets enamored by the external energy and gets trapped by the material laws of nature. On the other hand, as we saw in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, it is saying that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is living within the body of a living entity, is the controller of all living entities all over the universe. So when the living entity recognizes that I am spirit soul, part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and the Lord who is present within my heart, so there is also the Supreme Lord who is present within my heart. So as soon as the living entity recognizes this fact, oh, I have nothing to do with this material world. I have nothing to do with all this inlets and outlets. They're all temporary. Just like Prabhupada gives an example of a big businessman, there will be so many things that may be coming and going in his office, shop, and or his business, but he's not bothered about everything. He's aloof from that and he's still governing things. Similarly, when one recognizes that I have nothing to do with this inlets and outlets, rather as a spirit soul, I have some other activities, that is to satisfy the Supreme Lord, who is also present within my heart as Paramatma, who is also present in his personal form in Goloka. So my business is to satisfy the Lord. And therefore, all my activities are to be governed in such a way so that I can satisfy Guru and Krishna. As soon as one develops this conception and he starts acting on this platform, then what happens? He becomes free as the Lord, even while in the body. If one's consciousness, as we also saw, I think in a couple of classes ago, Iha yasya hare dasye karmana manasa gira nikilashu api avasthasu jivan muktaha sa uchyate. A person acting in Krishna consciousness, or in other words, in the service of Krishna, with his body, mind, intelligence, and words, is a liberated person even within this material world. Although he may be engaged in so many material activities, he has no false ego, nor does he believe that he is this material body, nor that he possesses the body. He knows that he is not this body and this body does not belong to him. So even when one is having this consciousness, even when one is within the material body, if one recognizes that I'm not any of these things, I'm spirit soul, my only business is to engage in activities which pleases Krishna, which pleases Guru, which helps one to advance in Krishna consciousness, and not to do any activities which does not make one Krishna conscious. If one is performing in that state, then that person is as free as the Lord, even while within the body. Therefore, a Krishna conscious person is free from both the outer and inner activities of the material body. And because of this, anything there may be some disturbances, some outer changes, gain, loss, jaya, jayo, labha, labha. So there is gain, loss, but the person who is Krishna conscious is never affected by any of these things. So just to summarize a few things, don't think I have a lot of slides today. Yeah, so basically the embodied soul in the material conception of life is conditioned and gives an opportunity to be entrapped by material nature. But when the living entity recognizes its true nature to be of spirit and engages in spiritual activities, then immediately what happens is that the living entity can find freedom and happiness even within these walls. And we are all getting this material body. Prabhupada gives another example of this dress that the prisoner gets. Prabhupada says that a normal person, a civilian, he does not have any special dress. But as soon as he gets into prison, he gets a new dress. Prabhupada says, similar to the aspect of Deha, the body that the living entity Dehi is receiving, is because in some point of time he did an activity because of which he is getting a Deha. and because of which he is being influenced by Prakriti. So just like a prisoner has to be reformed, similarly, if the living entity recognizes his true nature and engages again in devotional service, then this material body will soon go away, because there will be no more requirement for the prisoner to be in the prison, and he's given his original dress. Similarly, Prabhupada says, when the living entity performs devotional service on the spiritual platform, in Krishna consciousness, then the influence of Prakriti or material nature will vanquish, and then he finds a true freedom and true happiness. So that's all I have for today. Stop here.